All right, thank you so much. Here the program still this morning on ITV on independent television. Well, I thought we should be able to take one or two papers during the course of the program, but we should be able to do one or two things as it relates to the papers. Well, so let's just kick the discussion segment on now. I told you a while ago that we're going to be looking at what seems to be an attitudinal change as it relates to work environment and, of course, civil service delivery in Nigeria. Now, before this time, it was almost a no-go area when you tell people to approach civil service centers, government parastatals, and, of course, ministries to do one or two things. They will tell you that government officials are not responsive to work, as it were. But the dynamics now, and of course the narration now, seems to be changing. We are putting this discussion this morning together this morning so that you know that when you are in your work environment, it is expected that you give your work, your job, utmost attention. And of course, we're so privileged to have Ms. Precious Imuwahen. She's the Managing Director of Odigie Civil Service. She's the Managing Director of Odigie Civil Service Staff Training Center in Benin State. Madam, you're welcome to the program this morning on ITV.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, now let's just keep the discussion going on now, hitting on now. Now, let's look at attitudinal change in work environments. You know, before this time, just like what we said, that it was almost a no-go area. You go to office, you approach a civil servant, he behaves to you in a certain way as if you are not welcome. What do you think has necessitated that over time in Nigeria?
I think it's several things, particularly culture. You cannot remove the civil or public service from the environment within which it exists. Over time, I think we've just had less focus on excellent quality delivery just across the board, and you can find that in all sectors of society. And then we have sort of focused on other things, and these are some of the things that we're trying to change. Some argue that if you must change Nigeria, you must change first by changing our mindset. And I agree.
Okay. So when you say you change our mindset now, what about the entire, workforce? Talking about the way people attend to job and all that. Now, even if you change the mindset of individuals, let's look at the entire character, the entire behavioral pattern of workers in every establishment. If you change the mindset of people and you are not changing that, will you, get the desired effect that you intend to bring on board?
So in terms of changing mindsets, it's so many different things. I'll give you an example. I traveled with my kids. I have 2 children, and I think we're in some country that didn't have a lot of fences. And one of the things that my son said to me, he was 4 at the time, and he said, "Oh, Mom, these places are not like prisons." I said, "How do you mean?" He said, "But when you come back home, we have very high fences, barbed wires and things like that. Kind of looks like a prison." A 4-year-old said that to me. And then I would come back, and then I started to observe a little bit. There's so many things that play into the kind of mindset that a person has. The first one is the environment. It's often said again that you cannot grow beyond the environment that you exist in. That's number one. So there's the physical environment, there's the mental environment, there's the spiritual environment and things like that. So back to your question on how do you change a person or how do you change attitude, you are going to have to focus on, number one, that person's physical environment. Number two, what sort of work culture do we have? Interestingly, I was listening to Inuwahen earlier just whilst waiting, and it was talking about, the kind of culture that a leader should, project in an organization. So it's all of that comes into, and then of course, upskilling and retooling. So if you have a mindset that you want to promote, you need to train people, you need to sell them a vision, and you need to tell them that this is where I want us to go. If you do all these different things together, and you handle it strategically, not ad hoc, chances are that you're going to get to the destination that you want to go to.
Okay, now when you talk about training people, oftentimes we have some chief executives in a workplace and all that. They all often have difficulty in trying to pass that training? You are training a set of workers, a set of people that necessarily they are not internalizing. You know, they just render themselves untrainable. What do you do in such a circumstance?
You know, as an educator, I disagree that they are untrainable people. I disagree strongly. What I believe is, what methodology are you using? If you're training kids, there's a methodology. You know, there's the kind of pedagogical approaches that you should use. If you're training adults, there are approaches that you should use. And you need to understand your audience in terms of the way you curate the courses. For example, what's the skills gap here? You know, what gap do I want to fill? That's the first thing. The second one is, you know, what approach? Should it be participatory learning? Should I use case studies? What would give me the kind of outcome that I want? Should it be experiential? Until you have explored all of that as an educator, it's very difficult to say someone is untrainable.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Now, so let's you know, shift a bit now. Let's come to Edo State. Now, I was privileged to visit 1 or 2 parastatals recently, and of course, I noticed what personally, you know, I applauded the kind of change attitude, change work environment, and all that. Now, take for example, in some parastatals in Edo State, a worker can hardly come into office without clocking in.
Yes.
Now, it seems the state government, you know, has done something. What do you think the state government, what does it intend to achieve in all this?
I think one of the key pillars, you know, we have 6 thematic pillars, 6 core reform areas, and one of them is institutional reforms. His Excellency makes an argument that the civil and public servants, they are the engine of government, and it's going to be extremely difficult for you to get to the kind of Edo we want to get to in 2050 without getting that engine working right. It's going to be difficult to do that. So what must we do to ensure that the civil and public servants are optimal? It's different things. It's one of the reasons the renovations have been happening, and it's, you know, some of the things you saw in terms of people clocking in, is to ignite a culture change. It's the reason we have the Odigie Public Service Academy. It's the very reason why it exists. Because our premise is that through capacity building, we are going to strengthen institutions by building capacity, you know, within our workers. And doing all of this, we believe, is going to support our institutional reforms, and it's going to lead to the kind of changes where that revolutionary idea where a person who works for government understands that government primarily is a service. And if we get government right, the multiplier effect is that citizen engagement becomes better because you have a government that is working optimally as it should.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's very deliberate in that sense.
Okay. Now that is one parastatal you may want to say. The thing is that it is not this new recent innovation, you may want to call it now, seems not to have spread to almost all the public service in the state. You still go to some government parastatals, you still find the lackadaisical attitude of government officials, the way they pay attention to job and all that. If we have this kind of situation, do you think the state government will attain the desired goal that they tend to achieve?
Okay, the first thing here, I'll just do a disclaimer. I'm an incurable optimist. So when you ask an optimist a question, the simple answer is going to be yes. But now let's examine the facts as somebody who studied change management at master's level.
Okay.
You are not going to create change in a day. It doesn't work anywhere in the world, not in Nigeria, not in England, not anywhere, right? That's the first thing. And a lot of times when change is too disruptive and not incremental, you find that you get unintended consequences. So you might have the best ideas, but the parastatal that you want to change, there must be some sort of balance between where you want people to go to and where they are. And you also need to manage expectations. So that's why, for example, we have things like a 30, like a master plan, for example. And we're not saying that the change is going to happen just now. We're saying between now and 2050, Edo is going to be the best state to live and prosper in on this side of the Atlantic, right? So it's a process. It's a strategic process that we must now follow to get to where we want to go. So yes, are there still some parastatals who are not quite there yet? Yes, and I'm saying that, again, as someone who studied change, it's expected. However, what we're saying is if you continue in this trajectory, over time, you get to that destination that you want to get to.
Now, what is the guarantee that even after the governor leaves now, that this kind of innovation is going to stay?
Yeah, so that's the big question. You know, everybody asks the sustainability question. In terms of my institution, we already have a draft bill, so it's going to be institutionalized in the sense that, you know, there'll be a law setting up JUPSA to ensure that way after this government is stays. But beyond that, in setting up the John Odigie Ajoonu Academy, we were very deliberate. There are two ways we could have done it. I could have said, you know what, I mean, I have a first class in management, innovation, and change. Create a template, give it to the service, and say run with it. But that's not what we did.
Okay.
What we did was to form a change coalition, looked for all the people that are currently driving training in the service across all MDAs, brought them together to say, look, how do we build JUPSA? What will make sense for the service? So we are validating our strategy, we are validating our calendar with the service, and these are the people that will own JUPSA eventually. And the thinking is that if there is critical mass of people who believe in this vision, who are getting value, it becomes very difficult for us to have some sort of policy somersault situation in the future.
Okay, now when we say service delivery now, it is not only as it relates to the public sector, the civil service sector and all that. You still have the private sector and all that. Now, I don't know whether there are issues in private sectors,
Sure.
Private work environments, whereby the chief executives is not necessarily also passing the needed training to staff and all that. So if we have that kind of situation, don't you think we have issues, we have problems? There are some workers now that probably, it's almost about 8 o'clock now, we have some workers that are still not at work, even when the resumption time is 8 o'clock.
I think we have a discipline challenge in this part of the world. I've been doing training for over 15 years. I've trained across Africa in different, you know, markets, Angola, everywhere, name it. I recall one class that I had to start. I had just one person. The class was to start at 8 o'clock. Only one person came and I started teaching. When other people came at 9, I refused to go back. And a clear message was sent. What do you think happened the next day? Everybody was there by 7:30, seated. There was no excuse. And this happened in Lagos. You know, the traffic excuse did not exist. So I think we have a discipline problem, just generally. But I think one of the things that we don't measure, you know, I'm an economist, so, you know, we talk opportunity cost and all of that. We don't measure the cost of our bad behavior. I think somebody needs to now start to show business leaders that this bad behavior, you're losing profits because we're so profit-minded. But, you know, we are rent-seeking in a way. What do I mean? You know, start this thing, quickly make huge turnaround. Nobody's thinking long-term. And then the long-term, where's the Nigerian business? How many Nigerian businesses can hit that 100-year mark? You see? So we're not thinking long-term. You know, there's a concept called cathedral thinking, where the people who built the cathedrals, it was their grandchildren and the great-grandchildren that completed it. But it was the great-grandfather who started the vision. We don't have so much of that across the board, whether it be, you know, public service or even in the private sector. And all of this coming together is giving us the kind of country that we're living in currently. Yeah.
All right, so what is your target now? Because I understand that you still have the trainers now. Do you target the trainees only, or those that also train, that will train the trainees in return at your establishment?
That's a very good question. It's actually both. I often say that there's a JUPSA methodology. There's a way we do things. Not everybody can train at JUPSA. So you need to also learn our culture, because we're not talking to people. It's participatory. We want, you know, we want a certain outcome. So yes, we do train the trainers, but more importantly, even currently now, we have a class ongoing on negotiation and conflict management for permanent secretaries and their directors. We want to not just do training. We want you to be able to take what you learn in class and practice it. We want people to come back to say, you know what, we came into a JUPSA classroom, we learned project management, and now before I start any project, I start with a plan. It's not that we start the project and then we start making it up as we go along, you know. We start with a plan, we know what our outcomes should be, and at the end of the project, we do a debrief and we can measure. Again, you know, there's so many things that we can train on, but we've been very intentional this year. You know, the governor is very clear, the head of service is very clear in terms of how we need to go back to the foundational courses. You know, there's so many things we can do, but we're focusing on things like public service fundamentals, going back to basics. There was public service technical writing, because there was a time when if you read something written by a government official, you would know the difference between that and something written by somebody elsewhere. We're going back to those kind of courses. Project management thinking. They often say that the difference between the civil service and the public service is that the civil service, you know, formulates policy. How many people can formulate policies these days? So things like introduction to policy development are the things that we're consciously focused on in terms of what we want to train people on this year. And by the time we're done with 10,000 of our workers, it's our belief that going into next year, and if this is sustained over, imagine 10 years of JUPSA, what the possibilities might be.
Now, when I talk to government officials, I'm always weary of political statements and all that.
I know.
A while ago, you talked about that there is a bill that has been drafted now.
Yes.
We have a government that is, by next year, we'll be preparing for election and all that. So don't you think that's a political statement? Bearing in mind that another government may come in and may want to introduce something different from what people are doing. Again,
you know, that's a challenge, isn't it? Everywhere.
So if you have that challenge, how do we tend to achieve our aim?
Yes. So again, sometimes when there's something they call analysis paralysis. Sometimes when you overanalyze an outcome, you never leave home, so to speak, right? So there's a world where you say, I'm going to face this challenge in the future, and I just sit down and wait. Or there's a world where you say, I'm going to enter the arena and then continue to, you know, scale as I go. We have no doubt that the law setting up JUPSA will be passed. It will be passed before this government, you know, leaves. And it is our hope that there will be continuity. Again, I often say this in my classrooms, a mind expanded by a new experience hardly goes back to the initial place. That's the truth, especially when the experience was good. With the kind of feedback that we're getting, and this feedback is touching the public servant directly, and it's touching even their homes. Yesterday I was in the secretariat, and somebody said, I've been using negotiation skills with my wife at home. Okay. And I said, I don't know if that's what we told you in class, but he said, and you know, it's really working. When you have those kind of multiplier effects and people are getting value, it's not very easy to remove those kind of things. It's not to say that it's impossible, but you would hope that if people get value from a thing, the next visionary person coming in perhaps might choose that as one of the things that I want to continue because there is value, you know, in this thing. Okay.
Now, a while ago, you also talked about the root cause. That one of your aim is to identify the root cause. Now, from your own experience, because there's no way we can be talking about the bad attitude in place of work and even in civil service delivery on television this morning for the person watching there. And we don't also mention the root cause. It's been a problem over time. People, you know, have been so pissed off with the bad attitude at workplace and all that. So what would you want to say are really the root causes of some of these things that we're talking about?
Thank you. One of the things I liked, you know, one of the questions you asked me, I like the way you also created some sort of correlation with the private sector and all of that. We cannot remove the public service from society. A lot has gone wrong in our society in general over time. And, you know, public servants are you and I. I was in the private sector, I'm now a public servant, you see. So you cannot remove that. You know, over time, I think, you know, our focus just as a nation has been less on the education and perhaps, you know, a bit more on other things. And you would find that as we start to return to education, and by that I mean, for example, training, and if we sustain it over time, we are definitely now going to see the gains. In the markets, you know, in economic markets that we admire, they put a premium on education, and it's deliberate. There's a reason why a premium is put on education, because it's only a mind that is expanded that can create the kind of innovations that help put, you know, society forward. Okay. Now, this is not the first time that we are perhaps having a staff training center in Edo States. I know that successive government has had it over years and all that. But what is the difference? What makes the difference with what is happening now and what we used to have? Thank you so much for that. One of the things that I did when I was just appointed was to go and look at this, you know, reports from the staff training center that was set up by Governor Ogbemudia at his time, 1970. We had one. Even Adams Oshomole, we had it too. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So was to look at it and see what worked. And when it worked, it really worked. That's the truth. When it worked, it really worked. In fact, I hear from, people who, some of them still alive, who are beneficiaries of that center. They said, you could get posting across. People came from other jurisdictions to Edo. We've always been some sort of knowledge hub, from time immemorial.
So what changed?
But again, neglect. Again, neglect. And if you start something very well and you don't give it that focus, that commitment, whether it be financial, whether it be in terms of personnel, that is required over time, it's neglect, really. So one of the things, and that's why it's important that everybody's talking about sustainability, is that we must do now is to ensure that we continue in this trajectory. What happened in the past was we start something really good. It's almost like we don't have a problem starting things in this part of the world. It's the sustaining it that tends to be where the challenge is. Yes.
Okay. Now, from your own experience, what would you want to suggest here that at what level can somebody get trained? For the person watching this morning now, you have a lot of persons employing people and all that, a lot of employers employing employees. Is it at the level of before you come walk into employment, into service, or during, your stay in service and all that? So what would you say?
Oh, you just asked the wrong person that question. I think you should train, retrain, and train.
It's continuous.
It's continuous. You don't stop training. When you're joining an organization, serious institutions will train you. That's the truth. You need to be trained on the culture, because you're coming from somewhere. You need to be onboarded into how we do things around here. You don't just come, resume, and start working. It's bad practice. You start with an onboarding program. People need to know this is, how we do things. This is our performance management system. These are the expectations. So we are all on the same page from day one. And that way, you're setting me up for success, because from the day I start, I continue. And whilst I'm on that job, I should be trained periodically. Things are changing. There's such a thing now called Zoom that some people didn't use before. I need to be trained. Technology keeps changing. Ideas keep changing. Policies are changing, So any serious organization must put a premium on training their workers. Otherwise, you don't go anywhere.
All right, now, so I think I will have to let you go now because of your job this morning.
Thank
I understand that you'll be resuming at work this morning. So for the worker watching you this morning, perhaps the civil servant watching you this morning, the worker in the private sector watching you this morning, what would you want to say? Maybe as it relates to work ethics and all that. Just look straight into the camera.
I would say that this is a very good time to be alive. We're in the knowledge economy. It's so important, beyond anything that your employer would do for you. As a person who reads a book every day, believe it or not, it's important for you to continue to expand your mind. You're not going to grow beyond what your mind can conceive. So it's up to you. And then if you're lucky enough, like you are a civil servant or a public servant in Edo, to have an employer who is investing in your education and saying, I want to train and retrain you, please take advantage of that. Make sure that you are present, like I like to say, for your own evolution. Because at the end of the day, yes, your employer benefits, but you are the ultimate benefactor of your own growth.
All right, so I want to say a very big thank you to you, Madam, Miss Precious Imuwahen, the Managing Director of the Odigie Public Service Training Center, talking about civil service delivery, and of course the attitudinal change in in work environment that has been so bad over the time. So we just hope that when we invite you sometime, that you oblige us to come on this program.
Absolutely.
So that you can spur workers into the right attitude, even as they get prepared for work.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Madam. All right, so the program is still here this morning on ITV on Independent Television. So we'll take a short pause now so that all the segments will come your way. Please stay tuned.